So the next step in here is to actually add in our code to do the search. So there's a number of things that we have to add. One of the first things that I'm going to do is going back into my movie here and looking at my library. The search is the first one I want, and so that search I'm going to add in a search linkage so that I can pull that out dynamically. So that's going to be one of the first things that we do in our code. Just want to make sure that that's set up. Actually, while we're at it, I'm going to add a linkage in here for image as well. Okay, and we're probably going to have some other ones that we add in as we go, but just to make sure we have linkages for each one of those. So going to our document class here, excuse me, our main. So let's click on that and take a look at main. So right now in main, all I have is my API key and a Flickr service property. Make sure you have your Flickr imports here, right? So I have those 3 lines to do imports. And the other thing you want to have is make sure you have that com folder in it with the files for the Flickr API. All right, so just make sure that you have that there inside with your Flash as well. So if I look in my folder here, I should have my Flash file, my constructor function. This is the Stein Flickr utils we're going to use to help us load images later. And then this is the com folder that has all the Flickr API files inside of it. And that's what we're using to import there. All right, you also need an API key. Close this out here. You'll also need your API key to make sure that you can actually load images from Flickr. And we have a variable here for the Flickr service, and we're just creating a new one of that. So right now, if I save this here, and let's close that group out. We're not going to need that now. And we run it. All right, we should pretty much get that. Now, one thing it says is that font should be embedded. I'm going to do that now. I forgot to do that in the last one. So that just means that in your library here, if you're using a font, so for example, let's open up Search now. And we have a couple of different styles of font. So we're going to view our properties. So view your properties in the window here. And so this is Helvetica Neue condensed. I'm going to click the down arrow once, make sure I have basic Latin. I use the same one, the name of it, and then embed like that. And then also check off ActionScript as well. And it will say it doesn't find one. And so anything that's dynamic, that one I didn't technically have to because it wasn't dynamic, but it's not a bad idea sometimes in case you want to use it later to do it. This one is Helvetica Neue regular. And check off that. And I think I have somewhere a bold as well. That's regular again. Just going down into that one, that's condensed. Let's have a take a look at our image. I think I used a bold. There we go. So anything that's different, italic, bold, other styles, Helvetica Neue happens to just have a bunch of them. You have to embed each one. Okay. So save that and run this again. Good. So now we're just basically getting nothing, no errors, no runs, no drips. And so we're going to move on to the first thing we want to do is pull out that search from our library and put it onto stage. All right, so in our, we'll go back to our main again, close it out by accident. I'm going to do everything in a separate function in this case as we're doing it. To make this font a little bit bigger here. Let's go up to there. All right, make sure you guys can see it. So show the search movie clip. So what I'm just going to do here is going to write some code to put this on stage. But I know I'm going to want to refer to this in multiple places. So one of the things when I'm thinking about this, we're going to refer to it in more than one place, is I'm going to need to have a property for it. So often if you have a thing that you want to show maybe in one function or another or hide in another, you need a property for that. So we're going to make one here, private var. And what I didn't do here actually, which I should do, I'm going to keep with be more consistent here about using underscore in front of private variables so we know what's private and public and get in that habit. So I didn't spell private right either. Private var search, and then it's going to be of type search, like so. So in the show search, we're going to create that search equals new search, right? And add child search, right? And let's see what happens with that. Now to do it, now I have to call that method here, show search. So what happens is this makes the document class a little cleaner by just calling methods here, because eventually we're going to get a lot more methods in this area here. And so it'd be harder to find things. So instead of writing a bunch of code all up in here and making the document class long, we'll keep it relatively short and add most of our code in other methods. So I'm going to test this again. And there we go. So we're seeing the bottom right corner of it. So I'm going to show you a quick thing to center something. So this is center movie clip that has registration point in the center. Right? So remembering this movie clip here has its registration point in the middle right here of the clip, and so that is going to allow us to write the code that we're going to write now. By the way, you can ignore this titles one. I'm just using that as our titles for the video here. So let's do that. Search x, so x is going across, equals stage width divided by 2, and y, which is up and down, stage height divided by 2. So now we'll run it again. And there we go. Now we have our search in here. So what we want to do now is let them type something in here. And notice I have a problem in that my text is white, so we're going to have to change that. And then click search and have the results appear here and change the title. So first let's change that text really quickly to black. Okay, so we'll change the color of that text to black, save that, and then come back to our document class here. So, in thinking through that, actually let's go back here and we can show it. Remember, everything, almost all the stuff when you're writing code is going to be triggered on some kind of action, and then usually often listener and handler for that. It's one of the reasons it's called ActionScript. So the action here is going to be clicking the search button, which is called search btn, but remember it's in our search movie clip. So we're going to write a listener for the button, and then a handler for the button, and that's going to call our search code. Alright, so I'll just have one section here for event. Oh, sorry. I can't write this for it until the search is actually in existence. So here is when we're showing searches when we're going to write our event listener. So this is a slight change for when you're used to writing your event listeners in the document class. Alright, so search btn add event. So I'm going into first I have to target my search movie clip, and then the button inside of that, and then we add the event listener to that. So it's just our typical mouse event. Click, and on click search, I will call that. Let's move our properties off to the side here. Okay. So now we have to write that handler for it. Again, you should be getting used to this. Private function, this is the name of the function, and then this is the type of the event object. So I use E, some people use EBT. Remember, so that's the type that we just had up there, and void. Okay. So when we click our search, what we actually want to do is search on Flickr. So usually when you're doing something with the API, it means you're going to make a method call to the API. So that involves going Flickr, and then it's like, well, what method call do we use? So you could use the Flickr documentation. You could also use the Flickr website. Search here for Flickr API. Right, and this is actually it. Flickr's photo search, but just if you didn't have it, then this is what we would use. Just gonna move this down a bit. So here's all our API methods, and so because we called our class underscore Flickr, instead of writing Flickr here, we'd write underscore Flickr. So I'm gonna go into photos here, and look around for it, and so that's what it is, Flickr photo search. So in the same way that this is here, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. This is the same syntax we're going to use for it as well. Alright, so let's go back to our Flash, and we're going to write Flickr dot photos, there it is, dot, and it should actually show up these things anyway as you go. Search. Now, the first thing it asks for is a user ID, which we don't really need, so we can put two quotes there. Then it's searching for tags. Now, if you wanted to limit your search, so all your searches you wanted, oops, sorry, I clicked on here, were related to flowers or something like that. Another way, when I'm looking at things down here, I'll see if I can get this to show at the same time. This is what I mean. See how this tags is bold, so it shows what's here next. If I don't want to use this, or I don't care about it, then I will put in whatever the default value is listed here. If you want to change it or do something else, then you will change that. Alright, so for now, I'm not going to have any tags. Tag mode, I'm going to keep as any. That's what's listed down there. And then text is, now what we want to do is pull in the text from that search. So remember the name of that text field here. Go to our properties, was search txt. But I can't type it in directly as search txt. I have to type it, look, target my search, and then search txt dot text. That dot text is very important. Now, if I don't want anything else, I don't have to put anything else. So this is going to go, and it's going to make a request of Flickr. And whenever we're doing that, now we need to get a response back. So sort of in that same mode that we talked about before, when you have an event like a click, then you're going to have your listener, and then off of that, you're going to have your handler, which we just wrote. In the same way, when you make a method call to the API, then off of that, we also need a listener and a handler. All right. For the search button, we had to add the listener after we created the search, because you can't click on it till after you created it here. For the Flickr listener, we're going to also add it right sort of after we create it. So we created the Flickr here. So we're going to add our Flickr event listeners here as well. So Flickr event listeners. So Flickr, we're going to add event listener. And all the Flickr event listeners start with Flickr result event, and then one of these events here. So the other hint on that is whatever you're searching for gives you a clue as to what it goes here. So you notice here we have flickr.photos.search. So under here is going to be photos, in order to Flickr, starting with photos, photos search. Right, so all those dots tell you what you have here. So there we go. See, photos search. Right, if it was flickrs.photos. something else, set dates, and as you can see here, so that kind of gives you a hint. Whatever you're calling, it's Flickr dot result event, and then based on the method you call, that's usually what the title is. All right, and I'm going to do it on search results. Okay, so now we have our event listener, and we need now the event handler for that piece. So that's like any other event handler. This is the name of it, and this is the type. All right, and now right now I'm just going to do a trace to make sure it's there. All right, flower, click search, and there we go. We got our search results. So far, so good. And if you want to save yourself a little bit of time while you're doing this, by the way, in that text field, you can just type something in to begin with. You can change it later, delete it later so the person can just put something in there they want. But this way you can just click search and not have to keep typing something in that. Okay, so now that we got our results, essentially what we want to do is we want to take these results and put them into a big list. So there's a number of other ways that we get a list of photos, because really that's what we get back, is a list of photos, and push that in. So we're actually going to make a separate method that's going to handle all the showing of the photos. So here, I'm going to do that. So actually what I'm going to have here is I'm going to organize these a little bit too. So these are event handlers. I'm going to put those all together. And we're going to have setup functions. These are going to set things up for us. I'm going to put show search up there. And then also I'm going to have as well this one for here, which is going to be Flickr display functions, I'll call it, when we're just going to show our Flickr stuff. So show search, which is sort of one of our setup ones, I'm going to move that up here. And then what I'm going to do for now, so I don't have to keep scrolling over it, is going to select that and then click this little thing so I can hide it a little bit. And then this is an event handler. So that is also going to go here with the other event handlers. And generally in my event handlers, I want to have like 1 or 2 lines of code that call some other function to do it. So in this one, what we want to call is something that says show photos, or perhaps show thumbnails, right? And you can call it some different things. We call it different things in class, and we're going to actually modify this as we go. But just to remind you that the name of this is not super important as long as it makes sense. So I'm going to call this thumbnails because this is going to be when I show a group of photos as the small thumbnail size. So there we go with the void, and we're just going to do another trace to test it. Okay, and so now when we run this, I should get both got search results and then show thumbnails. Okay, so to show thumbnails, we're actually going to have to show things in a grid. And to do that, we need a number of different variables here. So I'm actually going to pause again for a second and then come back with a little magic when we have all those variables set up to show what we want to show as a grid in thumbnails. Because there's already some other tutorials for that you can take a look at if you don't remember. I'll go over it very quickly, but let's pause here for a second. Okay, so I've come in here and we've added grid properties, our X position, Y position, column width, row height, max width, and item count. And just as a quick reminder, that comes from here, right? So our X and Y position is is our positioning of each item, and then the column width is the distance from that one to the next one, and the row height is the distance from one to the next going down like that. We have a max width. We also have an item count. We can use either one to limit how many we have across here as we go. And so as we go, I'll show you that. So maybe we'll use item count this time since we know based on our other one that we want to have, let's go here, we wanted to have 8 across. All right, and I want to have room for 5 down. That's our scroll pane. We actually already put out our scroll pane. So let's get those things set up and get those variables set. So in terms of the initial setup, we're going to create a function to do that, to do our setup grid. Okay, and where we're going to call it is as part of the show search. So I'm going to make this bigger. So we're adding our event listeners and so forth, and then we also want to then set up grid variables. All right, that's just, we know in search we're going to have that. This also allows us to, if we want to later, to have another function that might have also show things in a grid in another movie clip that would have different values for these variables. So set up grid. So for now I'm going to call it setup grid. The other one I might call something else. Let's call this setup search grid. Right, because this is what I need for my search. Later, if I wanted to show sets or something in a different grid or something else, I could do that. All right, so we had a very similar name for it before, but we didn't have search in it. So, and I'm putting it in the same place because this is another setup function. Okay. So remember our properties here. We have X position, Y position, column width, row height, and so forth. So we got to set values for each of these. Now if we go back and look here, remember our X position, we want to kind of start right here. In this location, which is a little bit interesting because now that if we centered this here, that's going to give us a little bit different starting point than we might normally have for it. Okay, so now we're being in this search here. So I'm going to just, for example here, create a square that I'm going to draw out here. All right, and selected it. Oops. Let's go back here. I shouldn't have put it over the scroll pane as I did. Now let me undo this. Okay, I'm going to show my timeline here and add in a new layer so I can make sure the square is on top of this. So when I do my square here, actually, part of the other thing is I'm going to take out these rounded corners here. I use that for the button. Put it out here and then change the width and the height on the info to our 75 and 75. Okay, so this is basically the square that we're going to want here. in our results, and it's going to go into the scroll pane. So if I was just putting it not in a scroll pane as page results, which I'm not looking at right now, then this would be very important, because then I'd have to look at the info here and get the X and the Y, and it's like -300 and -119, and start it there, which might be one reason, if you're doing page results, to actually move this registration point here. Instead of having it here, keep that on the top left. It might be a little bit easier for you to look at the numbers. But because we're putting these in a scroll pane, that means we're going to actually put them in a movie clip first. So instead of having to worry about this and do the numbers and worry about that part, I'm actually can put them at 0, 0. Alright, so this just shows you one way, though, of easily to make something that you're looking at a square and set it up and move things over to look at. But and also if you're doing page results. But in our case, since this is going into a scroll pane, we can start the X position at 0 and the Y position at 0 as well. And max width. Sorry, let's do the row column width. And then that was 75, because each of these are going to be 75 pixels. Remember, going back here, right? That's the column width, how much we go across each this way. So 75 times 8. The row height is also going to be 75 in this case. And our max width would be equal to, 600. Oh wait, I moved to the wrong one. Sorry. Okay, here we go. 600. Okay. If we're doing item count and so forth, we'd start that out at 0 as we're looking at item count. We actually might use that one in this case. So now we have values for each one of these grid properties. So we have our grid set up and ready to go. So now we're ready when we're going to do our event handler here, the show thumbnails. But before we actually start writing code and show thumbnails, we have to make sure we have passed in our photo sets to that. So when we get our photos back from a search or whatever, there's going to be an event object, right? E. And pretty much all the ones from Flickr have a data property to it. So e.data. And then for this, it's going to be photos. All right. And if we aren't sure about that, one way to check that out is to put a breakpoint here, then do Shift Control Enter, and test out what we have there. Whoops, sorry. I wrote some code here. So let me just show you what that error is. So it says incorrect number of arguments expected no more than 0. All right, so I'm going to close that out here. So I wrote an argument in here, but I didn't have one in there. So for a second, I'm going to comment this out, put the breakpoint on my trace line, just to show you what that is. Oh, I didn't save it, so I'm going to get the error again. Save it, get our error, run it again. Click search, and here we go. So if we look at our variables here, that's our event object, that's data, photos is a paged photo list, and then inside of that, photos is my array of photos. Right, so page photo list will tell us what pages we're on, how many pages there are, a lot of flowers apparently on Flickr, and how many we have per page. We can change the number per page when we do the actual search itself, but we're not going to worry about all that stuff for now. For now, we're just going to worry about photos and realize that that's an array, and that's what we're going to pass into our show thumbnails, right, is our array of photos. Okay, so I'm going to click this red X here to end the debug session. So now I know that in here indeed is event data.photos.photos, and I know the type here, the variable that's going to take it is going to be an array. Oh, I'm sorry, I should run this again because I don't know if I pointed it out very clearly. Right, this shows you what type it is. So this shows the overall as a page photo list, and that photos that we're getting is an array. So that data type here is what told me I needed to make this data type here that I'm going to be passed into. Okay, close that again. And so here we go. So now we're off to the races in showing the photos. So one of the first things that we're going to do here, and I'm doing this sort of all in one fell swoop. We talked about it in class before, but normally I might get to this in a little bit different way if I wasn't sure what I was doing first. Is we're going to put all of our photos into a movie clip because we're going to put that into the scroll pane. So we're going to make movie clip MC. There we go, new movie clip. All right. Store the thumbs for scroll pane. All right. And then we're going to loop through the photos. So we're using a for in loop. This is another way to go through the array. And so for the I in photos, what we need to do then is get a photo loaded in and shown. So we need a URL for the photos. So var URL, which is a string. So we need that URL to be able to load it in. That's Stein Flickr utils, and then get photo URL. All right, and so then the server is going to be photos I server, and our ID. When I say ID in server, remember again, I'm looking at these things here. So this one is the bold one right now. That's what it's looking for. Photos ID and photos I secret, and then the size is going to be square. So that's our URL, and then we're going to make a loader. All right, and this is going to be of type loader. All right, equals new loader. And if it's going right, by the way, this should be now, when I hit enter off of this, I let it autocomplete and hit enter instead of typing the full thing. It should have imported that in. So we had that, loader imported and the URL request imported. Actually, I may have written that up ahead of time before we did it, but if you didn't have it, that should have done it for you. Okay, and then we're going to load that in. So loader, oops, not loader info, load new URL request, and that's URL, puts in there, close that out. And then this loader, we're going to, for now, add to that movie clip. And later, we're going to look at a little bit more sophisticated way of doing that in the next screencast when we are actually going to show the large version of it. So that loads it in, and so we say movie clip add child loader. Now we want to position it in the grid, right? So we say loader x equals x position, loader y equals y position, right? So moving the x and the y of that, and then set up for the next thumb. So move that x position equal, add to that the column width. So just to write it from the picture, so here we go. X position was here. Now we want to add the column width to it to get ready for the next one. Then we're going to do an if statement, because eventually, from like this, we're going to add to the column width and it's going to go past our max width. And at that point, we're going to want to move it back down over here for the x and down there on the y. Okay, so we're plus equaling the column width. And then we do our little check. We'll say check to see if past max width. Oh, the other thing that we could do is here our other variable we had, which was the item count. We could add that in. Item count plus plus. 1, 2, item count. So the two ways we could do this if statement here are, one is if our item count is past a certain amount. So if item count is greater than 8, because that's how many we wanted, then move call back to the beginning and move y down 1 row. So our x position equals 0. We're going back to the beginning. So let me close this group out. I don't really need it right now. Okay, our x position goes back to the beginning, and our y position adds in a row height. Alright, so the other way you could have written this, by the way, is if x position is greater than max width. Alright, that's another way to do it. So that ends our if, and this ends the for loop. Alright, so let's take a look and see how we're doing so far. So we're showing that we got the search results and went to show thumbnails, but we're not quite there yet. So part of the problem right now is that we're adding everything to this movie clip, but we haven't put this movie clip into our scroll pane. So after the for loop is done, it's search. So remember, our scroll pane is inside of our search. So that was the one I put it out by hand this time. If you wanted to use it as a property, you could do that, and you wouldn't have to refer to it quite in the same way I'm doing. Scroll pane dot source equals movie clip. Now let's see what we're doing. So looks good, except for the problem is it seems like after this we keep moving down one. So the first time went across seemed okay, and then after that it went down. So let's take a look at our logic and figure out what happened. And here's the problem. We said if item count is greater than 8, we want to move back, but we also need to reset the item count, because item count is now staying at 8, and so they're all going down to the next row. So item count we can use to just count how many we've put down when we hit a certain number, like 8 in this case. Then we want to know we go to the next row, and we have to set item count back to 1. And actually, I should make sure that I started item count at 1. No, I didn't. So I should start item count at 1. That was a mistake. Because this is just a count. It's not an array. It's not an index. It's just a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Boom. Next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. So let's run this now and see how it goes. All right. So that's great. So now we have our photos out. And then the only other issue is that we need to have this scroll bar in here. We don't have a scroll bar right now. So let's add in our scroll bar. And to do that, basically, we have to tell it to update it. But we have to wait until our images are loaded to update it. So we have to add an event listener to our loader to tell it it's updated. So add event listener to loader to know when image is loaded. And so that's loader dot content loader info. It's a little bit odd, but that's how it works. That's what you add your event listener to. And the event is complete. Right? And I'm going to say on thumb loaded. All right? And so that one there is now going to go into our event handlers. On thumb loaded. E, it was just a plain old event. Right, and then this time we're going to call search scroll pane update. So you have to update that scroll pane. So now we should be able to run it again. And get that scroll pane added in there. Now because we didn't account for in the width of our scroll pane the extra pixels that this adds in here, we're also getting a little bit of scrolling on the bottom there. So if here, let's take our scroll pane and we're going to make it a little bit wider. So I'm going to go into info here and let's say this is, that looked like it was about 20 pixels wide, right? So instead of 600, we're going to say 620. Right, and I may want to center that or not, depending on how it may affect your calculations. You may want to go back and redo some things, but I'm just going to leave it there for now and then take a look. And if you're setting that scroll pane dynamically, then you can do it. So actually it was probably even too far. It's probably only about 15 pixels, maybe 5 pixels or so there left over, so I could do it again if I didn't want that little gray area. We could go here and say 615. And see if that works. Alright, and so now we have our, actually it looks like 1 pixel off. So anyway, we'd fiddle with that and get it right. Oh yeah, keep changing it, 616. And now we have our search that gets our results. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is be able to click on one of these and show a bigger image of it. That is for another screencast.